Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to be able to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly someone who is not really a stranger to you, Mr. Speaker, or to any members of the Assembly. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I understand that recently you performed a very special ceremony involving the marriage of this particular gentleman and his wife. In your gallery today, Mr. Speaker, is the Provincial Ombudsman, Mr. Brian Sawyer. I would ask that he stand for a moment. Mr. Speaker, in the 20th annual report to the Legislature, tabled recently, the Ombudsman advised of his resigning his appointment effective today, and that he would be leaving for a new challenge after some, I believe it is 36 years of effective public service. In his last report to this Assembly, the Ombudsman said, "I believe one should not underestimate the effectiveness of quiet diplomacy in an atmosphere of mutual respect." Mr. Speaker, and members of the Assembly, would we all say a fond farewell and thank you to Mr. Brian Sawyer.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a report from the Standing Committee on Legislative Offices. Mr. Brian Sawyer, the Ombudsman, has tendered his resignation effective May 15, 1987. The committee has approved a delegation of powers by the Ombudsman to the Executive Director of the Office of the Ombudsman, Mr. Marcel Arcand, pursuant to Section 26 of the Ombudsman Act. This delegation covers all powers of the Ombudsman, with the exception of the power to make reports and the power to delegate further. Mr. Arcand will serve as acting Ombudsman until such time as a new Ombudsman is appointed under the provisions of the Ombudsman Act.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Member for Olds Didsbury.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 38 grade 6 students from the W.G. Murdoch School in the town of Crossfield. These students are accompanied by two teachers, Mr. C. Barrett and Mr. P. Klimkowitz, and two parents, Mrs. V. Langevay and Mrs. Clayholt. I would ask that these students and their guests stand and receive the very warm welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Millwoods, followed by Stony Plain.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased this morning to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly 40 students in the grade 6 classes at Sackau Elementary School in the constituency of Edmonton Millwoods. They're here this morning with their teachers, Mrs. Donna Hamilton and Mr. Paul Aman. They're in the public gallery. I'd ask them to rise at this moment and receive the warm welcome of the members.
Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 25 students from the Brookwood Elementary School in the city of Spruce Grove. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Darlene Arnold, and Mrs. Neufeld, Tricia Arnold, Mr. Hugh Richards. They are seated in the members' gallery, and I ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
Overbar.
Mr. Speaker,
I take great pleasure this morning in introducing 32 grade 5 and grade 6 students from the Uncas School in the county of Strathcona in the constituency of Clover Bar. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Peter Learn, their parents, Mrs. Bonnie Avers, Mrs. Grace Candless, and Miss Tracy Candless. They are seated in the public gallery, and I'd like them to stand and receive the recognition of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. Mr. Speaker, young Albertans pay car insurance rates which are 4, 5, and 6 times higher than young people in the 3 other Western provinces. For example, I have a 1987 survey which shows an 18-year-old male pays $2,415 for standard insurance coverage in Calgary, compared with $455 in Winnipeg, $523 in Vancouver, and $457 in Regina. My question to the Minister, does the Minister not agree that a person's insurance rates should be based on their driving record, not on their age and their sex?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the principle of rating for insurance premiums that is based on the risk factor of a particular class. And in Alberta, that is what the insurance companies do. They have the classes worked out according to the age and region, and in some cases they add the marital status and gender of a class. We have, when you look at the statistics across Canada, one of the lower premium rates for all classes, save and except one section. But I did notice that the statistics or the comparisons that the Honourable Leader quoted all refer to government-owned insurance schemes, BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. For a variety of reasons, those are not comparable. And I might point out, for example, that the Manitoba Insurance Corporation recently was asked some embarrassing questions as to excessive losses that were not announced during the election.
We're asking you supplementary question to this minister. Ask the young people what they think about the rates in Alberta. And I would say to this minister, it's completely ridiculous that that companies operating in this province will charge thousands of dollars to insure a young person with a clean driving record. And my question is to the minister, why doesn't the minister stand up for the young people in this province instead of being a mouthpiece for the private insurance companies?
Mr. Speaker, the premiums are based on claims statistics, that is to say the number of accidents per thousand in a class. And it's very clear that the number of claims per thousand for young people, particularly young males, is much higher than for other classes. In particular, for the group aged 18 to 19 who are male, there are 32 accidents per thousand licensed drivers in 1985 as compared to 10.6 per thousand for males over the age of 65. It is that sort of claims experience for a class that indicates that the premium should be higher in recognition that the experience is much different.
Speaker, this is blatant discrimination. What about the young people? What about the young people that have good driving records? For example, in Edmonton, we find that they have to pay between $2,000 and $2,070 a year. These are people 20 years old with a perfect driving record, and we compare them with Manitoba, $386, $538 in BC, and $509 in Saskatchewan. My question is, why should young people with good driving records pay such a high price to live here in Tory, Alberta?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the leader might more appropriately have asked the question, why should anybody pay any insurance if they have a clean driving record and have never had an accident? The logic The logic is completely absent from his question, and is purely a political ploy that he is taking, much like his counterparts in Ontario at this time. I might add that the natural consequence of what the leader is advocating would be an increase in premium for everyone else in Alberta, and so instead of speaking for one smaller group of Albertans, I am speaking for all Albertans.
Yeah, decreasing profits.
This minister is speaking for one group of people, the private insurance companies, and that's it. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is simply this. Has the minister's department even bothered to check to see if this discrimination based on age and sex violates the Charter of Rights?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we most certainly have, and indeed there is a case in Ontario called the Bates case, Bates and Zurich Insurance, which was contested on that very basis on the grounds that there was discrimination that is not justifiable. It went to a divisional court of Ontario, which clearly and unequivocally said that there is no discrimination that is not justified in this case. It has gone on now to the Ontario Court of Appeal, and we are watching that case with great interest.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Supplemental, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. While indeed shilling for the insurance companies who indeed may be subsidizing some of their lost profits in other provinces by what they are able to charge here, would the minister not look into the Individual Rights Protection Act as to whether or not there's an infringement of judging these young people guilty before indeed anything has happened at all?
Mr. Speaker, if the member for Westlock Sturgeon were to read the statute to which he referred, he would notice that there is a section that says that justifiable discrimination is acceptable in this province. The very case that I mentioned a moment ago, the Bates case, is being debated on much the same sort of legislation in Ontario, and to date the judicial recognition of the fact that these rates are indeed justifiably set is the point that I was making a moment ago.
Barr, followed by Lethbridge West.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Honourable Minister. I served on a legislative committee for 2 years where we looked at the problem with the socialist programs versus the free enterprise programs, and I would like to ask the Honourable Minister, in light of the fact that some of the other provinces do have lower rates, we cannot argue about that for the younger people, who makes up the difference between the lower rates in some of the socialist plans and the free enterprise plans? Who pays that difference in the other provinces?
Mr. Speaker, the point is this, that every other Albertan's rates would increase substantially. So every member in this House would be paying far more for their auto insurance rates than they are now. And every other Albertan over the age of 25 would be in taking on that increased load.
Lethbridge West.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister. In view of the fact that this appears to affect so many people in the province of Alberta, would the Honourable Minister give consideration to recommending to the Assembly that perhaps a select committee of this House could look at the whole question of auto insurance in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I take the suggestion in the spirit in which it was, I no doubt, intended. We are, however, watching events that are occurring, particularly the legal ones regarding the Charter of Rights and interpretation of statutes in other provinces. And until that case has gone, which it might go to the Supreme Court of Canada, I think it would be premature to strike any select committee.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to direct my questions today to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs regarding some unreasonable and unsafe demands placed upon employees that have contributed to a morale problem in her department. Is it the policy of the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs to require all employees in a particular branch to take turns carrying departmental monies and securities to the bank each day
with no protection, no training, no insurance against theft, loss, or error?
Mr. Speaker, I can't answer the question in its specifics because I have not ever inquired into the practice to which the member alludes.
Well, you should have. Mr. Speaker, I would like to file for the information of the Assembly a confidential document that confirms that this was in fact directed by one of her officers in the Edmonton region. There are 3 copies here. I would like to file them. Does the minister will the minister then look into this practice and correct the problem?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if I might ask to see a copy of the document to which this member is referring.
The answer is yes, Honourable Minister, but in due course, and we're not going to hold up question period waiting for this, especially when filings normally take place much earlier in the day's business. Supplementary question?
Well, Mr. Speaker, would the minister commit to this House that once she has looked into this, that she will hire professional, bonded individuals to transport those department funds to the bank, or at least properly train and pay and insure one of the present employees that might be willing to do so, rather than have a roster system forcing each person to take a turn?
I will take that question on notice. Until I have seen what the member is talking about, I have no intention of answering his questions.
To the House, a filing was mentioned. Did a filing indeed take place, or were the copies not? Thank you. All right. Final supplementary, or don't know which supplementary, but please, a supplementary. It's the final. Thank you.
In view of the fact that I don't get some answers on that particular aspect, I would just try a different question then. What efforts has the minister made to ensure that the burden of her 11% cuts in full-time positions is not placed on the backs of employees, when our information is that unpaid overtime employees is 1 hour per day? That is the first question I asked. No, it's not.
Mr. Speaker, these are properly questions that would have come up in estimates. And by the same token, let me say this. There were, of 350 positions in Consumer and Corporate Affairs, 33 of those were abolished or will be abolished in this budget year. Of those positions, 13 were occupied. Of those 13 individuals, all but one, as I understand it, have either been reassigned to other positions within the public service or have found positions in the private sector. The one who has not is not intending to leave until October 1st of 1987, pardon me, and we fully expect to have that person also reassigned in that period of time. My understanding from the staff of the Consumer and Corporate Affairs Department is that these abolishments of positions and these reassignments of people have been accomplished with goodwill, that there is good morale, that the people in the department are excited about the new directions the department is taking, but that there are 1 or 2 individuals that repeatedly are not participating with the rest of the team in the department.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon, main question, followed by Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Agriculture, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture. With grain prices today, Mr. Speaker, at the depression low levels or lowest levels for some years, the only hope for grain farmers have is to be able to sell large enough volumes to break even. It would seem, though, there's some cloud on the horizon with respect to disruptions in grain transportation, particularly in labor strife. A minister stated on May the 12th, Mr. Speaker, and I quote from Hansard, "We are going to continue to monitor the situation and to continue to make representations to the federal government." My question to the minister is, will the minister inform this House as to the content of those representations?
Mr. Speaker, on a regular basis, I am in contact with individual ministers at the federal level who do have various responsibilities. If the honourable member would like me to give him an itemized breakdown as to how often I have telephone conversations with these individuals or what procedure he'd like me to follow, I would appreciate him putting it on the order paper so that we could give him a detailed response.
Mr. Speaker, I was trying to save some paper. I was after content, not the timing. I realize that you are in constant contact. So you say, I want to know what you're saying. Could, Mr. Speaker, I would like to then ask the minister, is he making any representations to the CN and the CP to see whether or not they would back off what appears to be rather unreasonable demands?
Mr. Speaker, we have in this great country of ours a process whereby there are opportunities for mediation and negotiation. If the honourable member is suggesting that we should outlaw the right to strike or whether we should outlaw the right to negotiate from a management point of view, I would appreciate it if he'd be a little more forthcoming.
Mr. Speaker, it'd be a pleasure. I would just ask him to ask the railroads to back off a bit. It's very similar. Do it all in one sentence. And he has at least phone him and contact him. Would the minister please justify to his assembly then and the grain producers of this province why he considers this effort sufficient when you're given the disastrous impact that could happen on grain transportation delays and what grain producers will have to go through if we do not get the railroads and the unions together?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would like, I'm more than happy to give him an update as to the status of the negotiations. I gather that there is going to be mediation and discussions again between the two groups from the information that we have received that had just developed yesterday, whereby in the past they were not having further discussions, but I gather that they are going to again have further negotiations.
Mr. Speaker, that's our complaint, the farmer's complaint. He gathers. We want him to know. We want to know what's going on rather than gathering. Well, would the minister go so far then to assure the House that alternate routes for transportation are being looked at and planned if indeed we cannot get these two groups together?
Mr. Speaker, we always look at alternatives. If I was to follow the suggestion of the honourable member that he raised in the House the other day, I must admit there was no substance to his suggestions as to alternate routes or as to the decline in sales of barley. We're more than happy to follow through with suggestions that are realistic from the honourable member, but unfortunately I must indicate to him very few of his suggestions are realistic.
Bangerville.
Supplementary to the Minister of Economic Development, is the Minister prepared to recognize that the railways' raising of freight rates to grain farmers and their attempts to squeeze more out of their employees through concessionary bargaining is not just a coincidence, but a direct result of the Conservatives' enthusiastic endorsement of the deregulation of transportation?
Mr. Speaker, that's not at all accurate, and I believe the honourable member is aware that it's not accurate. The government of Alberta has held the view for a number of years that we must work very hard to improve the efficiency of our railway transportation systems. And there are a number of factors that enter into that improvement of efficiency. There are a number of pieces of legislation that are involved. There are a number of initiatives that have been taken and initiatives that need to be taken. And recently we've made representation to the federal government through the Standing Committee on Transportation of the views of the Alberta consumers and shippers with respect to changes that need to be made. The situation with respect to a labor dispute is one that we abhor as Albertans because it impacts so heavily on our capability of moving grain or other commodities to market. And we believe that it would be appropriate to find other mechanisms to resolve these sorts of disputes.
Clover Bar, followed by Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture, I think the Premier would remember the cry when he sat on this side of the House, on to Ottawa. Can the Minister of Agriculture tell this Assembly if he realizes, and his counterpart in Ottawa realizes how critical, because of the problem that agriculture is having, that there be a settlement and that there not be a strike of the grain handling facilities?
He gathers
very much so in response to the honourable member for Clover Bar. As he is aware, when there was the serious situation developing last year, we indicated to the federal government in a very forceful way, as the honourable member had indicated, and at that time we were happy that the federal government did react. As I indicated a few days ago in the chamber, Pierre Cadieux, the then Minister of Labour, indicated that the two parties should get together. The situation was resolved. I should point out that there is a procedure that one goes through in these labour negotiations. It's a many-fold procedure. The federal government has appointed a federal conciliation commissioner. That commissioner has to report to the federal Minister of Labour, and at that time I'm sure he will act. But what I am going to do, I will take the advice of honourable members here, because we are planning to do that anyway, but to underscore that action, we are going to communicate our desire that all preventative measures take place so that hopefully a strike will be totally, there will not be any possibility of a strike, and we will convey those desires to the federal government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My supplementary question is to the Minister of Economic Development. And I wonder if the department is, at the time these negotiations are going on, if the department is working on any alternative measures, such as the question I asked last year in this assembly of the possibility of moving grain down through the states to get it to markets.
Mr. Speaker, that question was raised by the honourable member last session, as well as I think 2 days ago by the member for Westlock Sturgeon. And one of the difficulties with utilizing alternate methods or alternate rail systems, for example, the Burlington Northern, is the method of payment of the Crow benefit, which makes it difficult to economically move grain by alternate modes. And that's one of the reasons that the government, that the Alberta government has held the view that is consistent with the view of the majority of Alberta producers, that the Crow benefit should be paid to the producers in order that there is the opportunity to establish alternate modes, including the opportunity to move grain by truck.
Member for Clover Bar, followed by the member for Calgary Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, my question is the Honourable Minister of Energy, and this has to do with the Dome-Amico proposed deal. Is the Minister in a position to indicate if he's had any discussions with Ottawa as to any contingency program to be put in place in case that deal does fall apart?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister indicate what discussions he's had with his federal counterpart to look at the possibilities of acting in some manner if the deal falls apart?
Haven't had none, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, in light of the fact that the Primrose air weapons range is involved as part of the Dome deal, is the Minister telling this Assembly that the Alberta government has had no discussions with the federal government as to what contingency plans would be in place if the deal falls through or is renegotiated?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm telling the House is that I haven't had any discussions with the federal government with respect to the Amico Dome deal.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, in light of the fact that some of the notes could be called by the end of June, is the provincial government and federal government looking at some type of interim financing to keep Dome alive pending a new deal with some other buyer?
Mr. Speaker, I know the honourable member has been a member of this House since before 1967 even, I guess. And he knows that we can't deal with hypothetical situations in the question period.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the Premier is really in a dream world, because this affects the entire oil industry in this province. And so I am absolutely disappointed that the provincial government, so I'd like to know the Minister or the Premier.
Member, Chair hesitates to interrupt, but all the main question and 3 supplementaries have been asked. by the member. The chair points out also that the first parts of the first three questions were in order because it was the second part of the question that was hypothetical, whereas in the last situation it was all hypothetical. But difficult to follow. Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a minute, I was afraid I'd lost my question to the member from Clover Bar. This is supplemental, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Is he aware that the provincial government has the right to stop foreclosures on land and property in the province, and would he use that power to make sure that he's fully conversant with all the Dome deal before he lets anything go ahead?
No, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Calgary Foothills, followed by the member for Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, last week some information from the federal government was made public that is said to confirm the decline of Canada's traditional industrial base. In view of some of the important findings of this study, and it is my understanding that these findings were the most comprehensive study on job creation in Canada, I would appreciate bringing some questions to this House. And my question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Are there conclusions to be drawn from this study regarding the importance of small business in this economy?
Mr. Speaker, there was a decision made a number of years ago to establish a small business database, and the decision was made as a result of consultation between the provincial, territorial, and federal governments in order that we would have adequate statistical information to assist in policy development for economic development in this country. The first release of that compilation of business statistics for the period 1978 through 84 was very important in terms of providing guidance to governments, and it provided us with, and it confirmed to us that small business is a critical component of the job creation activities in this country. And we've been aware of that and have had very aggressive small business assistance programs in this province. But the statistical information did confirm that small business is vitally important to job creation in Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, what does this study indicate specifically about job creation in Alberta over that period? Are there any important factors there?
There's a great deal of information contained in the study, both from a national perspective and from a provincial perspective. From a provincial perspective, one of the key elements was that Alberta was second in Canada in terms of total number of jobs created by the private sector. 16% of the total number of net new jobs created in Canada were created in Alberta in that study period. Also that there were certain changes in terms of where the job creation occurred, and the largest sectoral area was in the service industry, and my colleague had referred to that previously in terms of these shifts that are taking on. And another key factor, Speaker, was that the smaller businesses, those with fewer than 20 employees, were the major creators of new jobs in Canada and in Alberta. And as a matter of fact, 62% of the new jobs that were created in Alberta were created by firms with 5 or fewer employees.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, are there any major insights in this study for the future diversification of Alberta economy?
Yes, very much so, Mr. Speaker, in terms of, I'd indicated that the service industry has become a major job-creating sector in the economy, and that reflects our government policy placing a higher priority on tourism, which is obviously a service industry, the opportunities for expansion in the finance sector, and for smaller manufacturing companies that specialize in high-quality, high-value new products that respond to particular market areas. And those could include manufactured products in the fashion industry, or plastics, or rubbers, or high technology. Those are where we've identified opportunities for both small and large business in Alberta.
My final supplementaries to the Minister of Career Development and Employment, and as the Minister responsible, are there implications in this study finding for your future department planning? Mr. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, although I'm in government today, I still think as a small businessman, and that's my terms of reference whenever I'm trying to determine the direction we should go in terms of programming within the department. I do believe that the study the Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills is referring to is not as current as we would like it to be, but I'd like to indicate that since April 1st of 1984, this government has funded 170,000 jobs in the province, and I should indicate to the House that all or substantially all of those programs, Mr. Speaker, are funded on the job training or work experience in the private sector. The recently announced labor market strategy is targeted at small business in recognition of the contribution that they do make to job creation in this province. And in my view, the enhancement of small business, particularly the service industry, Mr. Speaker, is in fact diversification. It's not diversification in how we would look at diversification in a normal circumstance, and that is by looking for large manufacturing plants and smokestacks, Mr. Speaker. It's diversification is happening, in fact, in the service sector, by small business, so that we can compete beyond the borders of this province and, in fact, internationally.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Is the Minister concerned by indications that the control of our economy is becoming more concentrated in the hands of powerful conglomerates?
Mr. Speaker, we've just been reflecting on the job creation in Canada, and that the vast majority, as a matter of fact, 92% of the net new jobs created in Canada were by smaller firms, which are generally Canadian-owned. I was interested in the 1986 results of new incorporations and new business formation in Alberta. That incorporations alone were 16,000, plus partnerships and proprietorships totaled another approximately 14,000. So there were new business formations in Alberta in 1986 of 30,000, which were Alberta companies. It's not evident to us that there is a takeover of Alberta business life by foreign companies, although, Mr. Speaker, we in Alberta, the government side, welcome foreign investment. We welcome it in terms of the opportunities that it provides for us in many sectors of the economy to create activity. We have a role as a government to set the rules under which companies function, and we do that, and we welcome foreign investment in Alberta.
Supplementary question, Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, who has made so much of the importance of small business to economic development and the creation of jobs, and rightly so, in light of that observation, why is it that this minister has cut economic development or financial assistance to exporters by 53%, has underfunded the market development assistance program, and has cut his small business division in his department by 12%? How is that consistent with his current observations?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member might refer to Hansard from last week, where he asked the three identical questions. And someone asked if he could read. I'm sure he has the competence to reread Hansard. But I answered the three questions. I'd like to add, though, Mr. Speaker, that the government has worked very hard at developing small business programs that respond to the needs of the small business sector. And they have been successful. I've made available a document entitled Programs and Policies for Economic Diversification, and I would suggest again the honourable member look at it, with over 50 government programs. I'd also like to advise the House that the federal government has realized the importance of small business and has seconded one of our key individuals from the department to help them strengthen their small business sector, which demonstrates to all of us the leadership role that Alberta has held in Canada in supporting small business over the past 10 years.
Edmonton Calder, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Minister of Social Services. On Wednesday, the Minister was questioned about the criteria on the basis of which the current rates of social assistance are set. She indicated the basis for the food allowance was the Canada Food Guide, but made no mention of any criteria for housing, clothing, or personal expenses. Would the Minister indicate to this Assembly what criteria are used to establish rates for housing, clothing, and personal expenses?
Mr. Speaker, as I've indicated in the past, obviously there is a survey of a number of areas with respect to the items that the honourable member has raised. And when those various components are taken into consideration, along with market pricing and so on, then a judgment is made.
Yeah. Absolutely arbitrary. We're looking for specific criteria, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister explain why she has consistently and categorically refused to provide her department's criteria to the Income Security Action Committee as well as this House?
Mr. Speaker, I believe it's fair to say that it is the practice of this government to listen very carefully to all information that is brought forward. The honourable members may be laughing because they don't listen to their constituents, but we do. And on the basis of that, all of that information, Mr. Speaker, we believe that we make appropriate judgments on behalf of all the people in Alberta.
Well, people would like to know on what basis these rates are set, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister. Given the Minister's statement on Wednesday that we have identified in the province of Alberta the relative cost of shelter, food and clothing, and on that basis, that's how we have evolved the figures for social allowance, will the Minister table these relative cost figures in this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting in terms of the whole social allowance structure right across Canada and comparisons that can be made. And I think that it would be important for the honourable member to look at a province that obviously professes the same philosophy as the official opposition party does. And note that the one area that we have made a significant change in is the shelter allowance. And again, for the honourable member's information, it is our belief that although changes are required in lifestyle by individuals, that single employables can certainly manage with that allowance.
Based on what criteria, though? Right. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister confirm, given that on April 1st the Minister indicated to this Assembly that an objective study of real need would be very difficult to frame because real need is a subjective term. Aside from the Canada's Food Guide, the setting of social allowance rates are completely arbitrary.
Mr. Speaker, I suppose they are as arbitrary as the choice of opinions that are held by every single individual in this House.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supplementary to the Minister, both the Minister and the Premier insist that adequate accommodation can be found at the rate specified. Will the Minister and/or the Premier now meet with some of the people in Edmonton and Calgary, I'm suggesting Operation Friendship, Boyle Street Co-op and the various rental agencies, to find out if in fact their statements are accurate?
Mr. Speaker, on an ongoing basis, I would expect that the field staff and the department would provide us with information in terms of the people who are being served and what situations that they are faced with.
Member for Edmonton, supplementary, Vermilion Viking.
Yes, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate if there's been any work or trials done to look at what level of social assistance actually creates unemployment and takes away self-initiative in seeking one's basic needs in life, such as shelter, food, and other needs?
Mr. Speaker, that is certainly a matter that has come under some discussion, particularly just in the last few years by even people in the so-called intellectual community who have raised a number of concerns with respect to the history of social programs in North America. And while I realize that the honourable members in the official opposition would not want to hear any information that would differ from their passionately held opinions, I think it's important that all of us, including those of us who strongly believe in independence, look carefully at our programming, and if we don't believe it to be appropriate, if we believe that we are erring on one side or the other, that we carefully do that review and respond accordingly.
Member for Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by the member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the northwest region of the province, there are a number of regional economic development concerns that have not been addressed by this government as yet. To the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, during the last election, the people of Grand Prairie were led to believe by the sitting MLA that they would be receiving government assistance for a compact disc production plant. When will the government deliver on the MLA's campaign promise, or is it considering putting this plant somewhere else?
Mr. Speaker, the member is in error. The MLA for Grand Prairie did not make the announcement. He was present when the announcement was made. The reference was to federal aid and not to provincial aid. Is
the Minister of Economic Development and Trade therefore saying that his department will not be considering financial assistance, either equity or loan assistance, loan guarantee assistance to the building of that compact disc plant in Grand Prairie? Because the people of Grand Prairie certainly think that he is.
Mr. Speaker, that's an entirely different question. And I've had a number of discussions with the MLA and and I'm well aware of the efforts of the community to firm up that proposed development. We and the Department of Economic Development have worked with the proponents, and as yet I'm not in a position to make any sort of announcement as to whether or not we are prepared to make an investment or support the project until we are satisfied that the project is sound and makes good economic sense.
Could the Minister please give some indication to the House and to the people of Grand Prairie about when he thinks that he will be able to make that decision? What processes are in place, and when will he be able to make a more definitive announcement?
Mr. Speaker, in the most recent discussions with the proponents, a proposal was presented to us which we examined very carefully and made a number of suggestions and a counter-proposal that we felt were essential ingredients before I could bring the matter forward for consideration by my caucus colleagues. And as yet, we have not received a response to our request for an alteration of their proposal.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. It's clear that the closing of the Beaver Lodge Armed Forces facility will have a huge impact on the economy of the town of Beaver Lodge. Has the minister given any thought to what initiatives might be undertaken to offset this serious impact? For example, might the facility be used on an interim basis to provide the ADAC facility, which the services of an ADAC facility, which has been put on hold rather than being constructed as it was originally planned for Grand Prairie?
Honourable member, that supplementary does not follow from the original line of questions. Time for question period has expired. Might we complete this line of the original question if there are additional supplementaries, and also recognize the Premier to give supplementary information? Opposed? Any additional supplementaries from any other quarter of the House with respect to the compact disc issue at Grand Prairie? Honourable Premier.
Mr. Premier, I advised the House yesterday that I would, Mr. Speaker, I advised the House yesterday, Mr. Speaker, that I would check into information regarding Mr. Stephen Stiles, and I thought this would be an opportunity to give the House the supplementary information. I have spoken to Mr. Stiles. The information is this: I've satisfied myself that he stands by his original apology, and that he acknowledges and recognizes the reality of the Holocaust and the terrible persecution of the Jewish people. However, because of the impact on his family and himself by the manner in which this issue has been reported, he has asked to have his name withdrawn from the appointment, and I have agreed to do it.
Chair recognizes Edmonton Meadowlark on a purported point of order.
No, it's in fact a point of order, Mr. Speaker, under Bouchane 357 and 358. My original statement, my opening statement in the preamble, it was one sentence, not the three to which I am entitled. I said, in the northwest region of the province, there are a number of regional economic development concerns which have been addressed by the government. And I addressed one, which was the compact disc facility. Consistent with that categorization is the Beaver Lodge issue. Consistent with that categorization is the ADAC facility. Consistent with that categorization is also the tourism, Regional Development Tourism Authority, which is having difficulty, and I would have got to each one of those depending upon the kinds of answers that I received from the minister. I submit that my question was consistent with the general overall theme, and that the supplementals followed from my opening preamble.
Member for Cypress Redcliffe.
Order, Mr. Speaker, relating to the same sections quoted. I always thought that the preamble on a question was just what it says, a preamble on a question, and that those supplementaries related to the question, not to the preamble, Mr. Speaker.
With respect to the purported point of order, the chair follows the line of reasoning as developed by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark. Then probably every question raised in this House with its subsequent supplementaries would have to be allowed to go all over the map, not only of this province but of the universe. This is not, question period is not like estimates whereby one can just mention a department and then go willy-nilly throughout all aspects of the department. And the member for Cypress Redcliffe has properly pointed out that that oftentimes introductory material is a long way away from what the first question is, and I think the honourable member for Edmonton Meadowlark, just perusing the questions of the leader of his own party, for example, as well as other members of the House, would see that oftentimes we have a lot of extraneous material to begin with and then get into the line of questioning. And the chair's recollection of the line of questioning today was that indeed the first three questions dealt with the matter of the issue of a compact disc plant at Grand Prairie. Therefore, to then switch over to the use of a facility at Beaver Lodge for an ADAC facility was really stretching the issue considerably. So perhaps once again we might have a slight difference of opinion, honourable member, but that was the reason for calling person to order and not allowing that final supplementary. Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to the introduction